Hello, testing. Okay, I guess we can use this one. Okay, so we're now connected on Starlink. I had to switch over. Let's see how we're doing. We're back up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. All right, well, here we are in Folsom. Wonder how much we're going to lose as we start going through this. Be interesting. Testing.
Chinese workers
Okay, so where did I leave off?
physical risk, while the person controlled by the route. Alta, Blue Canyon, and Cisco mark the advance. Alta, Blue Canyon, and Cisco mark the advance into higher elevation, heavier snow, and greater isolation. The challenge was not only cutting the grade. Workers had to be fed, housed, and supplied while the construction front kept moving. Hills, water sources, storage areas, camps, temporary buildings, animal facilities, roads and telegraph lines followed or preceded the grade. A work camp was an industrial settlement. Alta, Blue Canyon, and Cisco marked the advance into higher elevation, heavier snow and greater isolation. The challenge was not only cutting the grade. Workers had to be fed, housed, and supplied while the construction front kept moving. Hills, water sources, storage areas, camps, temporary buildings, animal facilities, roads and telegraph lines followed or preceded the grade. A work camp was an industrial settlement. It required cooking, waste disposal, shelter, blacksmithing, tool repair, medical responses, powder storage, and transportation. Thousands of workers could not be sustained by a locomotive and a pile of rails alone. The summit region concentrated the largest problems. Crews had to excavate through granite, construct tunnels, create retaining structures such as the China Wall, establish grades across ravines, and keep the route passable through some of the heaviest snowfall encountered by an American railroad. The China Wall is a large dry-laid stone retaining structure associated with the summit tunnel complex. Individual stones were fitted to create a stable support for the railroad grade. The wall is not a decorative monument built after the railroad. It is part of the working infrastructure. At Summit Tunnel number 6, workers attacked the mountain from both portals. They also sank a vertical shaft.
Oh, you missed what we did here in Folsom. So we went down, we scouted out, we found the California marker, we found a Pony Express marker, and then there's a California, historical Folsom, end of the Folsom line. And then we walked over there, and there's California's first train turntable thing. That was over there, that got excavated in the 90s. And then we walked downtown, and man, it was hot. I guess that's all you missed. A little bit more, but ready to pick up where we left off? Here we go.
Roughly 75 feet through the granite to reach the tunnel level. The shaft took approximately 85 days to complete. Once it reached the planned elevation, crews could excavate in 2 additional directions from inside the mountain. The project therefore had 4 active headings, eastward and westward from the 2 portals, and eastward and westward from the central shaft. This was the tunnel-scale version of the Continental Railroad. Central Pacific advanced east. Union Pacific advanced west. Inside the mountain, crews advanced inward from both ends and outward from the center. Parallel construction saved calendar time by increasing the number of active faces, but it multiplied the demands for surveying, ventilation, explosives, debris removal, supervision, and supplies. The 16-month figure heard on the museum tour was so striking because the physical site had already been seen. The appropriate historical response is to ask primarily through Chinese labor. The railroad's dependence on timber was enormous. Wood became ties, trestles, bridge components, buildings, camps, retaining cribbing, tunnel supports, telegraph poles, and snow sheds. Early locomotives also burned wood. The railroad simultaneously consumed timber as fuel, used timber as infrastructure, and transported timber as freight. Snow sheds were especially demanding. They formed protective roofs and walls over exposed sections of track, allowing snow and avalanches to pass over or around the line. They also introduced new problems: fire, smoke accumulation, rot, maintenance cost, and an enormous continuing requirement for lumber. Reports that removed snow shed lumber was later placed at the base of particular grades may be true at specific locations, either as cribbing, fill support, or discarded structural material. But that claim should be documented site by site. Visible timber may belong to different construction periods. Some may come from original wooden sheds. Some may be later repairs or reused material. No timber near the active railroad should be treated as original merely because it looks old. The forest was not uniformly clear-cut everywhere, but railroad mining and urban demand transformed particular Sierra and Tahoe watersheds. Timber cut around the Tahoe Basin also moved through a different industrial chain toward Carson City and the Comstock. In that system, trees were felled, moved to lakeside facilities, processed at sawmills, hauled by narrow-gauge railroad toward Schooner Summit, and sent down flumes toward Carson City. From Carson, wood could be transferred to the Virginia and Truckee Railroad for shipment to the Comstock mines. The wood became fuel, buildings, and underground mine supports. Carson City was an intermodal transfer point within a resource extraction system. That chain should be kept analytically separate from the Donner Railroad's snowshed lumber. They are related examples of Sierra timber extraction, but they are not automatically the same material stream. Steam fuel also evolved. Early California locomotives burned wood where it was available. Railroads later used coal and, in California, increasingly adopted petroleum fuel oil. Southern Pacific's cab-forward locomotives could place the firebox and cab at the front partly because liquid fuel could be piped forward from the tender. A coal-burning version would have faced a much more difficult mechanical problem, moving solid fuel from the tender to a forward firebox. Southern Pacific number 4294, preserved at the California State Railroad Museum, is the sole surviving cab-forward steam locomotive of its type. It was built in 1944 and belonged to the AC-12 class, the final class of new steam locomotives acquired by Southern Pacific. The operating cab ahead of the boiler and smoke box, so crews would not be enveloped by exhaust in the long tunnels and snow sheds of mountain routes. It is an articulated 4882 locomotive, meaning its driving wheels were divided into two engine units beneath one boiler. Its boiler operated at approximately 250 pounds per square inch. Earlier locomotives commonly operated at lower pressures, though the precise pressure varied by class and period. Comparing 150 or 250 psi with pressure in other machines can help establish scale, but comparisons with nuclear submarines must distinguish different systems. Reactor coolant pressure, steam generator pressure, hydraulic pressure, and hull pressure are not interchangeable measurements. The cab forward is an important demonstration of technological cause and effect. Tunnels solve the mountain barrier. Snowsheds solve part of the snow problem. Tunnels and sheds trap smoke and gases around conventional locomotive crews. The railroad then reorganized the locomotive to place the crew ahead of the exhaust. This is not a machine designed backward for novelty. It is an advanced adaptation to an operating environment created by earlier infrastructure. Larger freight trains eventually required even greater power. The Union Pacific Big Boy locomotives, associated especially with the heavy grades between Ogden and Cheyenne, represent another stage in the development of articulated steam power. Cheyenne will provide an opportunity to study both the locomotive and the support system required to operate it: roundhouses, shops, fuel, machine tools, inspection labor, and division point schedule. The Chinese workers who built much of the Central Pacific's mountain line were not an incidental minority in the workforce. Stanford's research reports that roughly 90% of the 10,000 to 15,000 Central Pacific workers came from China. Their work included grading, tunneling, blasting, masonry, track laying, and other construction. Their compensation and conditions reveal the economic structure of the project. In spring 1867, the company increased Chinese wages from about $31 to $35 per month. Workers demanded $40, reduction of the working day from 11 hours to 10, and shorter shifts in dangerous tunnel work. Chinese workers generally had to pay for their own food, while white workers often received board as part of compensation. Approximately 3,000 Chinese workers joined the strike. Management responded by cutting off provisions and preventing workers from using the railroad to leave. The strike ended after roughly a week without the workers winning their full demands. This was not merely a disagreement over wages. It demonstrated how control of food, transportation, and geographic isolation could defeat workers who controlled only their own labor. The workers were not all legally enslaved, and their individual migration arrangements varied. Some borrowed money or entered credit arrangements to finance travel. Others were connected through labor contractors, family and district networks. It would be inaccurate to collapse every Chinese worker into one legal category of indenture. But the labor system can still be analyzed through the same questions used in modern trafficking investigations. Who controlled transportation? Who controlled food? Who held the debt? Who could leave? What happened if the worker refused an assignment? Could the worker obtain independent housing? Could the worker bring a family? Could the worker complain without retaliation? Freedom on paper can coexist with severe practical coercion. The national sequence after construction is also important. The United States recruited and relied on Chinese labor for a project identified with national unity and progress. Anti-Chinese political movements then demanded exclusion. 1875 restricted immigration, particularly of Chinese women, through discriminatory assumptions about prostitution and morality. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 barred Chinese labor immigration. Later restrictions made departure, re-entry, family formation, and naturalization more difficult. The economic system extracted labor, before the political system restricted the people who supplied it. This is part of the railroad's cause and effect history, not a separate chapter added for diversity. Chinese workers continued working in agriculture, reclamation, road construction, and other railroads after the Transcontinental line was completed. In places such as Locke, the Delta, Niles Canyon, and other California communities connects the mountain railroad to later agricultural and urban development. Museums now face the challenge of incorporating these histories into collections originally organized around locomotives, executives, luxury passenger cars, and corporate achievement. The newer podiums about women, Chinese workers, Black railroad employees, Native communities, and queer figures are interpretive additions around a physical collection assembled under older priorities. It can appear that some groups now receive a large amount of new signage. But the older male and corporate narrative is not limited to signs. Built into which locomotives were saved, which executives' papers survived, which private cars were restored, and which institutions funded the museum. A historian should not simply count new panels. The more useful questions are, which evidence entered the archive? Who possessed the power to preserve it? Who could write and publish? Who had descendants able to donate documents? Which physical objects were considered worth saving? The Railroad Museum's Native American material introduces a fundamentally different interpretation of the train. For corporate promoters, the railroad represented national connection, commerce, and technological achievement. For many indigenous communities, it represented military expansion, settlement, resource extraction, habitat destruction, and loss of land. These interpretations are not mutually exclusive descriptions of different railroads. They are different positions within the same system. The railroad expanded the federal government's capacity to move troops, supplies, settlers, mail, and information. That increased national power in the Civil War era and afterward. It also increased the government's ability to impose authority on native nations and accelerate settlement across indigenous territory. The environmental consequences were similarly dual. Rail transportation could move goods more efficiently than wagon traffic, but it also made extraction at continental scale economically possible. It allowed timber, minerals, livestock, and agricultural products to reach distant markets. Efficiency per ton of freight did not necessarily mean less total extraction. It could mean far more extraction, because the market had become larger. Anna Judah's paintings and pressed flowers belong within this material history. but their importance should not be overstated beyond the evidence. Theodore Judah's engineering surveys and political advocacy directly shaped the railroad project. Anna Judah accompanied him, recorded landscapes through painting, and preserved botanical specimens. Her work provides evidence of the places and the intellectual environment surrounding the surveys. It also shows that infrastructure begins in representation. Before a route becomes a grade, it exists as observations, sketches, measurements, maps, reports, and arguments. A painting can make a remote landscape visible to someone who has not visited it. A survey can convert that landscape into elevations and distances. A map can make a proposed route politically discussable. A congressional act can convert the proposal into legal authority and financial incentives. Labor and material then convert the legal and visual representations into physical infrastructure. That is the defensible historical meaning behind the phrase. A pressed flower made a superpower. The flower did not cause the railroad by itself. It belonged near the beginning of a long chain involving art, field observation, engineering, finance, law, labor, and national logistics. Later sequence from William Keith and John Muir to Ansel Adams and Ken Burns shows how visual media influenced public understanding of Western landscapes. Painting and writing made places emotionally vivid. Photography allowed images to circulate as evidence. Documentary film combined photographs, letters, narration, and music into a national memory. Promontory itself was a media event. The locomotives were positioned nose to nose. Officials gathered around the final rail. Ceremonial spikes and tools were prepared. Photographers composed the event. The telegraph carried the news. Years of labor and political conflict were compressed into an image of national completion. The photograph was real, but it was selective. It emphasized executives, officials, locomotives, and ceremony. It did not adequately represent the thousands of Chinese workers responsible for much of the Central Pacific construction. Promontory also demonstrates the difference between symbolic completion and continued operation. On April 28, 1869, Central Pacific crews laid 10 miles and 56 feet of track in approximately 12 hours. Handlers were publicly emphasized, but at least 400 Chinese workers placed ties, spiked and bolted rails, aligned track, and tamped ballast. The record was an industrial choreography. Rails, ties, spikes, bolts, ballast, wagons, animals, food, water, and telegraph work all had to be prepositioned. The visible rail handlers could only move rapidly because a larger system continuously supplied and completed the work behind them. After the Golden Spike ceremony, Promontory briefly supported a tent city of workers, merchants, and speculators. Later railroad facilities included a turntable, roundhouse, coal shed, water tank, bunkhouses, and helper locomotives. This is another reminder that the famous ceremony was not the whole railroad. A functioning line required a settlement and maintenance system. Ogden eventually became more important as the practical interchange city. Promontory was where the ceremonial joining occurred. Ogden was where rail traffic, workers, hotels, warehouses, schedules, freight, and passengers were organized into a continuing network. Reno and Cheyenne similarly grew from transportation logistics. A temporary railhead or tent settlement could become a permanent regional center if the railroad continued to require shops, terminals, labor, water, fuel, and transfer facilities. Other settlements disappeared when the construction front moved or the operating route changed. This route will also parallel the history of national mail. The Pony Express carried mail through gaps in the rail and telegraph system. In California, its rider route crossed the Sierra farther south than the Donner Railroad, generally through the US 50 corridor toward Sacramento. The NPS Auto route follows US 50 from the Nevada border to Sacramento. The Pony Express and Central Pacific stories meet conceptually and in Sacramento, but they do not share the same Sierra alignment. Aoni, preserved at the National Postal Museum, represents the later railway mail service. Beginning in the late 1880s, He followed mailbags onto railway postal cars and traveled with postal clerks. Workers attached tags and medals recording the places and railroads he visited. When the tags became too heavy for his collar, a harness was provided to distribute them. Aoni's tags functioned as a physical travel record. More importantly, the railway mail cars demonstrate that the railroad did not merely carry sacks. Postal clerks sorted mail while the train moved, converting travel time into processing time. Mail could arrive at the next junction already organized for transfer. The communication sequence was therefore horse relay before continuous rail and telegraph. Telegraph for messages that could be encoded. Railway mail cars for physical documents and parcels. Junctions such as Sacramento, Ogden, Omaha, and Albany for rerouting.
Miners ravine salmon.
The national system advanced not merely because vehicles became faster, but because sorting and transfer became more organized. Dwight Eisenhower connects the replacement of one continental system by another. In 1919, he participated as a War Department observer in an Army convoy of 81 vehicles traveling 3,251 miles from Washington to San Francisco. The trip took 62 days and tested the military's ability to move by road. As president, Eisenhower became associated with the interstate highway system. Railroad enthusiasts can reasonably argue that federal highway investment intensified competition against passenger rail and railway mail. But the decline of passenger rail had multiple causes, including automobiles, airlines, corporate decisions, suburban development, and postal changes. Eisenhower's connection to the Pony Express Centennial is not a contradiction if viewed through military logistics. The Pony Express, Railroad, 1919 convoy and interstate system were successive responses to the same national problem: how to move messages, people, freight, and military power across continental distance. Our expedition now follows the railroad east while also following technological time. Sacramento represents the Western construction, origin, and river transfer system. Folsom represents the earlier railroad, Pony Express transfer, convict labor, water power, and long-distance electricity. The Folsom Dam and Canal were built in part through a bargain involving land for the state prison and prisoner labor. The completed waterworks supplied the prison's own powerhouse, and later the larger commercial Folsom powerhouse. In July 1895, electricity was transmitted approximately 22 miles to Sacramento at 11,000 volts. The Sacramento Electric Power and Light Company operated the generating plant, Sacramento substation, and streetcar system. That complete system was American River, Dam and Canal, forebay and penstocks, turbines, generators, transformers, transmission line, Sacramento receiving station, streetcars, lighting, and industry. The generating station and distribution station are not separate stories. They are opposite ends of one circuit. The cab forward represents mature mountain steam technology. Truckee represents logging, snow operations, and maintenance. Reno and Carson City represent mining, timber, river, and regional railway systems. LE will preserve the infrastructure of a mining railroad, yards, shops, locomotives, machine tools, buildings, and track. Promontory will show the construction climax, parallel grades, big fill, 10-mile track record, and media ceremony. Ogden will show the operating interchange that followed the ceremony. Cheyenne will show mature heavy freight, locomotive shops, and big boy power. Omaha and Council Bluffs will provide the eastern counterpart to Sacramento. Union Pacific built westward from the Missouri River system, before a permanent bridge made the railroad fully continuous with the eastern network. The river was therefore another transfer problem, rather than a simple starting line. Steamtown in Scranton will show the later Eastern Steam Railroad ecosystem: roundhouse, turntable shops, repair labor, and preservation. Washington will show the legislative and administrative side: the Pacific Railway Act, land policy, military logistics, postal policy, immigration law, public contracting, and national preservation. The expedition is not simply following one line of track. It is following a chain of political decisions and material consequences. The Civil War sits behind much of this history. Congress passed the Pacific Railway Act while the nation was divided. A continental railroad and telegraph had military and political importance. It would connect California's resources and Pacific ports more securely to the Union, strengthen federal communications, and allow faster movement of mail and government supplies. California gold had already affected national finance and migration. The railroad then reduced the distance, cost, and uncertainty separating California from eastern markets and government. But the same national capacity that strengthened the United States externally also strengthened its ability to impose policy internally. Railroads supported settlement, corporate landholding, and military campaigns. National integration was not experienced equally by everyone. The core historical lesson is therefore not the railroad was good, or the railroad was evil. It was a state-supported corporate infrastructure system that produced enormous mobility, economic expansion, and national power while also producing exploitation, environmental transformation, displacement, and concentrated wealth. The lesson for modern government is to study the complete system rather than the ceremonial object. A locomotive requires fuel, water, track, maintenance, and workers. A railroad requires law, land, finance, terminals, food, housing, signals, and transfer agreements. A port requires dredging, channels, warehouses, roads, rail access, and customs systems. A hospital requires more than equipment. It requires reliable transfer of history, medication information, responsibility, and follow-up. A city agency requires more than jurisdiction. It requires authority and coordination sufficient to produce a final public outcome. A government contract requires more than a legal award. It requires technical competence, oversight, correctly designed incentives, life cycle planning, and a termination condition. The public should not merely ask whether an agency performed an activity or whether a contractor produced a component. It should ask whether the complete system worked, whether the benefits justified the cost, who absorbed the risks, and whether the public retained enough knowledge to supervise the private organizations performing the work.
Yes.
That is the national study beginning here.
Yes.
The campaign began by studying Santa Monica as a familiar city. From there came comparisons with Santa Clarita, Los Angeles, county agencies, and California systems. Fieldwork expanded into water, airports, parks, roads, disability access, public health, housing, electricity, and civic procedure. California added missions, indigenous history, forts, mines, gold, rivers, levees, ports, railroads, electrical systems, highways, and state government. The Transcontinental Expedition now adds federal law, interstate commerce, military logistics, immigration, national mail, corporate finance, and the physical integration of the country. The objective is not to memorize every date. It is to recognize recurring structures, information latency, prepositioning, intermodal transfer, bottleneck ownership, worker dependency, route lobbying, public subsidy, private capture, fragmented authority, bad incentives, maintenance obligations, environmental costs, exclusion after extraction, and the institutional control of historical memory. Those patterns are visible in the railroad because the earlier versions remain in the landscape. There are abandoned grades, old tunnels, ferry slips, fills cuts, retaining walls, stations, powerhouses, and towns. Modern digital systems often erase their earlier versions. Railroad history leaves the old code physically exposed. We are traveling east to read that code. The fieldwork begins at Sacramento, but the railroad did not begin from nothing. It began with earlier roads, ports, ships, mines, forests, financial institutions, indigenous lands, immigrant networks, political campaigns, surveys, paintings, and laws. There is no true mile zero in a system. Every beginning has prerequisites. Every completion creates a new bottleneck. Every endpoint can move. And every monument leaves most of the system outside its frame. The purpose of this expedition is to bring that system back into view.
So right now we've left Folsom. We're welcome to Newcastle, a Placer County community. All right, we're in Placer County now. So we've been driving. We're on our way from Folsom to Auburn right now. We've got about 23 more miles left to Auburn. Should figure out how to get a map going on this thing for you so you can see it. I had streamed that whole thing earlier on at the parking garage, and the whole time it didn't connect. Oh, here's one of the aqueducts. I learned about this PG&E 1931 aqueduct. Jeez. There were all these aqueducts up here. Auburn, what I learned from. Oh man, so there's right by the freeway. Oh man, that's so cool. I forgot about all that stuff up here. I really liked it up here. I spent like a month up here, going in between Placerville and Auburn and Colfax, and I'm spending the night in Colfax right now. Tonight, Powerhouse Road. Oh, okay. You been here before? This is familiar. There was a powerhouse. That was the other powerhouse for Auburn. Auburn had its own powerhouse. Forgot about that. They had to have a generator for the town of Auburn, and there was something about how, because up here the water's like really far down from. Hold on, if I remember right, somewhere over here, you'll be up here driving around, and then the Manx, Myers Banks right there for sale. Like no engine, nobody. Okay, so the if I remember right, to get like fresh water stuff was like way far down. In one beach I went down like so far. Maybe I want to say like over 1,000 feet, 1,500 feet down to this water area, somewhere over here. Um, yeah, I mean, we're in the mountains now. What's our elevation? Oh, it says
You're about 887 feet above sea level.
well, that's not right because I just said 1,200 feet. So, yep. Woo. Let me switch to eco. Keep it under the turbo. We're going up a lot. Oregon bar. Oh yeah, there's these bars. Oh, it's my favorite was Chili Bar. A great time there. I mean, that's the thing. These people had to walk up here. They'd get to the train, they'd get to like there, like Folsom, right? And then they'd have to like hike on there were these trails, these like famous like minor trails to go from Auburn to Placerville. I think was a good a common hike. And then all these hikes are famous hikes. El Dorado hike or whatever. China Bar, river access. So that's maybe where the Chinese had to live because they couldn't go other places. Ask ChatGPT the history of the China Bar near Auburn.
I'm sorry, but I couldn't find specific information about a China bar near Auburn. However, Auburn, California, has a rich Chinese heritage, exemplified by the Auburn Joss House Museum, built in 1909 as a community center for Chinese residents. This museum offers insights into the lives of early Chinese immigrants in the area. That was from ChatGPT. Check important info for mistakes.
Yeah, thanks, man. That was where I found at the museum at the city hall for Auburn, this big old building. I was hanging out by the magnolia tree in the back, and I like found a piece of glass like from an old bottle that was in the root. So I brought it into the history museum and turned it in. Pretty excited. Okay, so Auburn got split by the road freeway too. Look at this. Here's the railroad. Sorry, guys. Oh, train tracks up there. All right, this is what we're doing. I did it. Yeah. We're back on the Transcontinental Railroad. Bow, bow, bow. Bow, bow, bow. Bow, bow, bow. Bow, bow, bow. I feel like I went to, we got Nevada Station here. Okay, going on. Cemetery on the right. Dawson Oil Company, Nevada Station. The Auburn Station. Spanish Flat. Famous gold era Spanish Flat. I've heard of that. So this was the main road before the interstate came in. Yep. As it was, as all of this came, everything. You did all this history last year. So fascinating you remember it. All right, we're gonna get on 49. This is exactly the 49er road. Was I looking at cars over here? Was this the Jeep that is at the base of the Rubicon? That's cool. I remember where that was. Is that over here? The Placerville. Is it Placerville?
Image China Bar near Auburn, California, is a historic gold rush mining site along the North Fork of the American River. Today, it's part of Auburn State Recreation Area and serves as a trailhead, river access point, and recreation area. But its name comes from the Chinese miners who worked the area in the 1850s and later. Some historical context. During the California Gold Rush, thousands of Chinese immigrants came to the Sierra foothills after hearing of opportunities in the gold fields. White miners often abandoned claims they considered worked out. Chinese miners became known for patiently reworking these gravels with careful techniques, recovering significant amounts of gold that others had missed. Areas where Chinese mining camps developed were commonly named China Bar, China Flat, China Gulch, or Chinatown. The bar refers to a gravel bar, a deposit of sand and gravel along a river where placer gold accumulated, not to a drinking establishment. China Bar was one of many river bars along the American River that supported placer mining before hydraulic and hard rock mining became dominant. As the gold rush evolved, the area transitioned from a mining camp into ranching and eventually recreation land. Nearby in Old Auburn, the Chinese community became one of the most enduring in the Sierra foothills. The historic Auburn Joss House, first established in the early 1900s around an older altar dating to the gold rush era, served as a temple, boarding house, school, and community center. It remains one of the best preserved reminders of Auburn's Chinese American history. If you're visiting on your transcontinental expedition, China Bar is worth thinking of as one layer in the transportation story. Native American travel corridor along the river, gold rush mining camp, Chinese immigrant labor and entrepreneurship, wagon roads and stage routes above the canyon, the nearby Central Pacific Railroad through Auburn, today's hiking, rafting, and mountain biking destination within the state recreation area.
What was the role with the Chinese in relationship with California before the gold rush? Because I remember the China wasn't allowed to trade with America for a while, and they were with the Portuguese or something. Because when Francis Drake raided the Portuguese, he stole China from them and traded that or gave that to the Miwoks, and that's how we know where he landed in San Francisco and stuff like that. But the question is, what's the history that led up to the Chinese working in the mines and then the Chinese then going to work in the railroads after that? Is that the correct order of operations?
I'm going to separate the Drake Miwok story from the later trade and migration timeline because they connect only indirectly and some details are debated. The Chinese questioned by May Review Airmail. Yes, broadly, the order was Chinese maritime trade, California gold mining, railroad construction. But it was not one single organized transfer of workers from one industry to the next, and the Drake story needs one correction. Before the gold rush, China was already connected to California indirectly. For centuries, China produced high-value goods, especially silk, porcelain, and tea, that moved through Asian, Portuguese, Spanish, and later Dutch and British trading networks. After Spain established Manila in 1571, Chinese merchants brought goods to the Philippines, where they were loaded onto Spanish Manila galleons bound for Acapulco. Those ships crossed the Pacific near the California coast, although they normally continued to Mexico, rather than trading directly with indigenous Californians. Francis Drake did not exactly steal China from the Portuguese. In 1579, after raiding Spanish shipping along the Pacific coast of the Americas, Drake stopped somewhere generally associated with the Point Reyes, Drake's Bay area. His captured cargo included Chinese porcelain that had reached Spanish America through the Asian trade. Evidence suggests that porcelain may have been left, traded, or salvaged by coast Miwok people. Archaeologists also have to distinguish Drake-related porcelain from porcelain carried by the Spanish ship San Agustin, which wrecked in Drake's Bay in 1595. So the porcelain helps support the general location, but it is not a simple Drake gave Chinese goods to the Miwok. Therefore, this proves the exact landing spot equation. China was restricted, but America was not completely barred. Your memory about restricted trade is basically the Canton system. The Qing government did not prohibit all American trade. It tightly confined most Western maritime commerce to Guangzhou, then commonly called Canton, and required foreigners to work through licensed Chinese merchants. The Portuguese had an older position at Macau, while the British became the dominant European traders. After American independence, the United States entered the China trade directly. The American ship Empress of China sailed to Canton in 1784, beginning regular direct Sino-American commerce. For roughly the next 60 years, the relationship was overwhelmingly commercial rather than diplomatic, and Americans bought tea, silk, and porcelain while selling silver, furs, ginseng, and other goods. The system changed after Britain defeated China in the First Opium War. The United States then negotiated the 1844 Treaty of Guangxia, gaining access and privileges similar to those Britain had extracted. Therefore, by the time gold was discovered in California, southern China was already tied into an active Pacific commercial system connecting Canton, Hong Kong, Southeast Asia, Latin America, and American ports. Why people left southern China for California? Most of the Chinese migrants who came to California were not drawn evenly from all of China. They came predominantly from Guangdong province, especially the Pearl River Delta west and south of Guangzhou. That mattered because this was the Chinese region most accustomed to overseas commerce and migration. During the 1840s and 1850s, Guangdong experienced severe economic pressure, population strain, floods, famine, local warfare, and broader upheaval associated with the Opium Wars and rebellions. Families often treated overseas migration as a survival strategy. A son or husband traveled abroad, earned money, and sent remittances home. California became known as Gold Mountain, Gumsan. News of the gold discovery reached the South China coast through ships, merchants, and earlier migrants. A small Chinese population was already present in California before 1848, particularly merchants and sailors, but the gold rush created the first enormous migration. In 1852 alone, approximately 20,000 Chinese people arrived in California, nearly 30% of that year's immigrant arrivals. First major California role, miners and mining town businesses. Chinese migrants entered placer mining districts throughout the Sierra foothills, including Auburn and the American River. Some worked independently or in organized companies. Others reworked claims that earlier miners had abandoned. They also operated laundries, stores, restaurants, lodging houses, vegetable gardens, and supply businesses serving mining settlements. They were not simply welcomed into leftover jobs. California imposed discriminatory foreign miners' taxes, and Chinese miners were subjected to robbery, violence, expulsion, and legal discrimination. These pressures steadily pushed many people out of the most desirable claims and into other forms of work. That is the background of names such as China Bar. A bar was a gravel deposit beside or within the river where placer gold collected. The name records the presence of Chinese miners, although it may also reflect how white residents labeled Chinese camps rather than the residents' own name for the place. Then the railroad, but with overlap map. The Central Pacific began building eastward from Sacramento in 1863. It initially relied heavily on white labor, but workers frequently left for better paying or less regimented opportunities, including mining. The company began experimenting with Chinese workers in 1864 and expanded recruitment substantially in 1865. Many early Chinese railroad workers were already living in California and had experience in mining, road building, drainage, blasting, camp organization, and physically demanding work. Recruiters later brought additional workers directly from Guangdong. Eventually, Chinese laborers made up roughly 90% of the Central Pacific's construction workforce and built most of the Western Line from Sacramento across the Sierra and Nevada toward Utah. So the practical sequence was South China Maritime Economy and Migration Networks, California Gold Rush migration beginning in 1849, mining, commerce, farming, and service work, discriminatory taxation and expulsion from many mines, railroad recruitment beginning around 1864 to 65, railroad levy, agricultural and industrial labor after construction. But the stages overlapped. Chinese people continued mining while others built the railroad. And after the railroad was finished in 1869, some railroad workers returned to mining, while others built branch railroads, reclaimed Sacramento San Joaquin Delta wetlands, worked farms and factories, or moved into towns and Chinatowns. The larger historical irony is that California actively depended on Chinese labor to extract gold, build transportation, drain land, and supply towns, and then increasingly treated the same population as unwanted, culminating in the Federal Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882.
Some may I be dumb, some may I be smart. I hope this is a good example, you guys, showing you like if you hate on the robot, it's because you're using it. And the key thing is to verify the information. There's nothing about that. I don't believe you. I've been gaslit this whole time by my parents. Now a gaslit master. There's that was levy water. That was water. We just drove over bird sanctuary. It's cool. Definitely not so great for the sound. I just went through Clipper Gap and I'm heading to Meadow Vista. Tell me about what I just went through. No internet. That is exactly why we're on satellite. Well, or we are kind of on satellite. The trees make it so hard for streaming with Starlink. Well, we got no. I mean, this is it. This is the edge case. This is the point of the whole game. We are getting in the mountains. Look at this. Look at these trees. Let's go. Let's go. We made it. We're doing it right now. I'm gonna get some gas at some point. Left Sacramento with no gas. Idiot. Climb the Sierras on a half tank of gas. Ah! Oh, we just blasted through that stop sign. Well, good test of that. It was like the first time I had to like slam on the brakes. Oh, my cars went down. Woody, you okay? You okay, bud? Okay. Well, that was a stop sign in the middle of just nothing. We'll watch that back later. Man. What the hoot and holler. Okay. This is a road. It's really nice. All right, let's focus on driving. Let's go 100% brain power on driving. You've been thinking about filmmaking and creative and story and history in school, but I think this is where you definitely need maximum brain power. Uh, The drone going ahead of the train is fascinating. Had unlocked a bunch for me. Thanks, kids. I mean, you thought about it, but you don't. I don't understand how the train gets to Truckee. Maybe how does the train get from Auburn to Truckee? That's my question. Dog Bar Road? There's a dog bar road. All right, so where am I? Let's see. Let's see what's going on for a second. Let's take a little break. Or let's see. All right, so where am I? Let's see. Let's see what's going on for a second. Let's take a little break. All right, we got good satellite. We found the road. This is us here. We are literally right here. So that's us right here. So we have found the Transcontinental Railroad. So it was running. It answers the question: is how does it go from Auburn to Colfax? Is it kind of weaves its way in and out of the 80. Post station, that would make sense. It's right by the train. Over here. Right, so we just drove up this road, kind of parallel to the 80. It's kind of fun. We were a lander crossing. What's the deal with lander crossing? Now, this is way more random than China bar. All right, back on the trail. I wonder why it's spray painted white. No, why didn't it only paint it white during the curve, and then it stopped being painted white there? Huh. Oh, here we go. We go up and down, and they don't. 2% grade. Ask ChatGPT what's the angle of a 2% grade, because that's what they said the trains could tow things up hills.
A 2% grade means the slope rises 2 feet for every 100 feet of horizontal distance. That's an angle of roughly 1.15 degrees, which is very gentle, perfect for trains since they struggle on steep slopes. That was from ChatGPT. Check important info for mistakes.
1.15 degrees. Ask ChatGPT how many degrees Baxter Street is.
ChatGPT asks, do you mean the steepness or slope angle of Baxter Street?
Both.
Baxter Street in Los Angeles has a maximum slope of about 32%, which is roughly 18 degrees. That was from ChatGPT. Check important info for mistakes.
Train on the right. That's cool. Oh, Colfax. I missed you. I really like Colfax. I went here twice, 3 times. I was thinking about living in Colfax. Oh, I'm sorry, Buddha. The car is literally. Well, I gotta do some repacking when I get a chance. Oh man, I love it up here. I went to this one town, like Cameron Park, airport town. Man, look at these houses. Well, this turns. That was a good turn. That was fun. Wonder how many road possibility curves there are. I wonder if you. Oh wait, wait. So what I would do is, you know how they have that predictor for videos. If you put a video in a thing, it tells you if they're gonna like it or not. I would do that for car roads. Like what angles like this? This is I don't like this. That's not fun. The other one was much more fun. That was a nice turn. Like this is a good one. Ba 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 ba. Well, there's some velociraptors there. There's some steel sculptured velociraptors. Two of them. What is that? I don't even know what that was. It's interesting that the 12-volt Starlink adapter didn't work. That took me. That was a good 10 minutes of. Oh, you got it. Whoa, dude's bucking a bronco. Was that was that guy? What was that bucking bronco? That was sick. I'll take that moment. Where are we? Oh, we made it to Colfax. We did it. It was in the backside. Hey, Shelby, welcome to Colfax. We got farmers market going on, maybe. Sort of. Train station, all good stuff. Colfax train station, similar to the other architectural design. Right. I'm not gonna get out of the car and I'm not gonna do more live streaming because that didn't work last time. So I still have yet to do a successful um, double transition. I've only done a single transition. What happened was sat there and I played the whole second half in the parking lot earlier, and then got out, walked around Folsom with you guys, but then none of it was uploaded because it broke in the parking garage where you saw it break. All right, let's do a. All right, we made it. We made it through Folsom, walked around Folsom, through Auburn, through China Bar, and then now we made it to Colfax. Let's do a big wrap up on everything, and don't make it too long, but what we've accomplished. We ended up switching over to Starlink. Major technical problems. Such a challenge to do this. I really like it. To do story, history, school, it is taxing the brain in such a way that don't and normally don't get to experience any other way. And this is just really something special. And I'm really, really lucky to get to be doing this right now. I mean, I'm sitting here, like, just to my right is the Transcontinental Railroad, and I've got the town of Colfax on my right. I have the Donner Pass ahead and Truckee to go, and then to Reno on the other side. And then, well, then we don't know. I know everything up to Truckee, and then beyond there, we're going on our own. So, well, I've been to Salt Lake, but I've never been to Ogden, and maybe I have. I'm going to Fargo and stuff, but man, this is gonna be exciting. So let's discuss what we've done on the stream, and walked around Old Town. We drove around Old Town. We left Sacramento. We did this. We drove all the way from Sacramento, following the Folsom Road, paralleling the train route to Folsom. Then Folsom, no highway to Auburn, and then no highway from Auburn, from Folsom. I did no highway to get to Colfax so far, which has been super fun. marker.
History.
I mean, maybe I should lower the resolution if we're dropping the bit rate so bad while we're going through the mountains. That's the thing. I just have to keep learning, keep testing, keep learning, keep learning, keep testing, keep learning, keep testing. Keep learning. What you draw, build, test, repeat. The simulate. You draw, simulate, build, test, repeat. All right.
Here's a version that sounds like you're speaking live to the audience at the end of the day. Well, we made it. We started in Old Sacramento, spent a full day inside the California State Railroad Museum, then walked the historic district, found the California Historical Landmark, explored the old railroad infrastructure, and talked about why the western end of the Transcontinental Railroad isn't as simple as a single point on a map. We looked at Sacramento not just as a city, but as a river port, a rail hub, a political capital, and a place where engineering, commerce, and government all came together. Today, we left Sacramento and intentionally avoided the interstate. Instead, we followed history. We paralleled the original transportation corridor through Folsom, where we connected the railroad to the Pony Express, the prison, convict labor, water power, and the birth of long-distance electrical transmission. Last summer, I had visited the Folsom Powerhouse. Today, I got to see the Sacramento end of that electrical system and connect those pieces together. From there, we continued to Auburn, learning how the gold rush transformed into the railroad era. We stopped around China Bar and started seeing the landscape that made all of this possible. The rivers, the canyons, the granite, the grades the engineers had to solve. History begins making a lot more sense when you're physically standing where it happened. Now we've arrived in Colfax. Behind me is Sacramento. Ahead of me is the Sierra Nevada, Donner Pass, Truckee, and then Reno. This is where the railroad stopped being relatively easy and became one of the greatest engineering projects in American history. One thing that's become very clear is that this trip isn't really about trains. It's about systems, politics, economics, engineering, labor, immigration, water, electricity, communications, military logistics, and the cause and effect relationships between all of them. Every place we've stopped has connected to 3 or 4 other places we've already visited over the past years. Stanford, Benicia, Alameda, Sutter's Mill, Fort Ross, Locke, Folsom, Sacramento. They're no longer isolated field trips. They're becoming one interconnected mental map. Technically, today has been just as challenging. We fought camera problems, streaming problems, network problems, and eventually switched over to Starlink to keep everything running. This style of live documentary filmmaking, driving, teaching history, running multiple cameras, switching communication systems, and trying to think several layers deep while staying safe on the road is probably one of the most intellectually demanding things I've ever done. And I love it. It's stretching my brain in ways I don't normally get to experience. I'm learning history while building a documentary, testing technology, and campaigning for president, all at the same time. It's exhausting, but it's exactly the kind of challenge I was hoping this expedition would become. The really exciting part is that from here on, the trip becomes more unknown. I've been to Donner Pass before. I've explored the China Wall and the tunnels. I've stood inside that granite and now understand why hearing they built this in 16 months completely blew my mind at the museum. Truckee is familiar. Reno is somewhat familiar. After that, we're heading into new territory. We'll eventually reach Promontory Summit, where the railroad was joined together. We'll visit Ogden for the first time, then continue east across Wyoming towards Cheyenne and Big Boy country, on through Nebraska, Iowa, and eventually Washington, D.C. This is no longer just a road trip. It's becoming President's School on a continental scale. And we're just getting started.
And what's that? What's the What's this at the near the Colfax train station? It looks like a light and a bell on top with going down. What's this thing I'm at Colfax? It looks like a light and a bell on it at the train station in Colfax, not too far. It's a fire bell tower. It's a fire bell tower. The bell is a flared bronze. The siren above it, the stacked circular, later electric addition. The steel lattice tower simply raises high enough for the sound to carry across the town. Now we have Watchtower, the app, and fire notifications, and no, those emergency pings on our cell phones, and the earthquake monitor pre-warnings we're up to now. And when we're in Folsom, it shows about how none of the old buildings were, because it all 20 something of the buildings burned in 1880 something.
Exactly. You're seeing the evolution of the same public warning system: bell tower, electric siren, radio television alerts, phone notifications, app based fire maps, sensor driven earthquake early warning. The Colfax Tower was essentially a town-wide push notification made out of steel and sound. It could tell everyone that something was wrong, but not necessarily where, how serious, or what they should do. Today, watch duty and emergency alerts can provide the fire perimeter, evacuation zones, wind conditions, road closures, and continual updates. Earthquake early warning systems go another step. Sensors detect the faster seismic waves and send an alert before the strongest shaking reaches places farther away. And Folsom shows why that warning infrastructure mattered so much. Its historic district suffered major fires in both the 1860s and 1880s. Much of the early commercial town was wooden, so fires could consume whole groups of businesses. The buildings that replaced them were increasingly brick, while the town added water mains and fire plugs, meaning the disaster changed not only the architecture, but the entire municipal system. That creates a really strong thread through your trip. Open quote. A town burns, so it builds brick buildings, water infrastructure, a fire department, and an alarm tower. A century later, that alarm tower becomes a siren. Today, the tower is effectively in everyone's pocket, and the warning can arrive before the fire, flood, or earthquake reaches them. Close quote. The buildings in Folsom are therefore not merely old buildings. They are survivors and replacements shaped by earlier infrastructure failures. The city you see today is partly a physical record of what burned down.
So the problem is these events, bad events, bring about change that is needed and should have happened earlier. It reminds me of the MGM fire in Las Vegas, and then after that, you then had ADA rules that changed the building codes. But the question is, we end up always choosing convenience over safety because the corporations have to make money, but society ends up bearing the costs in injuries and other lost wages and various other things that come later on. So the goal should be to efficiently simulate where to put the efforts into health and safety. And considering the DOT has that rate of each person being like $17 million, imagine if we took that seriously. Whoa, I went through the ChatGPT credits. What? You These guys. That's the thing. Gotta stay away from this. It's not the AI is the problem, kids. It's the corporations. Just heads up.
Yes, the governing failure is that we treat safety as a reaction to catastrophe rather than as an engineering problem that can be modeled beforehand. One factual distinction: the 1980 MGM Grand Fire directly drove major fire code reforms: sprinklers, alarms, smoke detection, compartmentation, and improved high rise protections. The ADA came later, in 1990, through the disability rights movement and established separate accessibility requirements. But your broader comparison is right. Both represent protections that opponents often called too costly until society finally recognized the much larger cost of exclusion, injury, and death. The economic distortion is straightforward. Open quote. A company sees the immediate cost of prevention. Society absorbs the delayed cost of failure. close quote. That delayed bill includes emergency response, hospitalization, rehabilitation, disability, family caregiving, lost income, public benefits, lawsuits, business interruption, trauma, and diminished quality of life. Because those costs fall across many different budgets and many years, the organization deciding whether to install the safety measure rarely sees the full price of saying no. The DOT already has a mechanism for correcting part of that distortion. The value of a statistical life, used to compare the cost of safety measures with reductions in mortality risk. The current DOT figure for analyses using a 2025 base year is $14.2 million, rather than $17 million. It is not a price placed on an individual person. It represents what society is collectively willing to pay for small risk reductions that, across a population, statistically prevent one death. But your idea goes beyond that. You are describing a kind of national preventable harm simulator. For each proposed regulation, building feature, transportation design, or health intervention, it would estimate probability of failure, people exposed, severity of consequences, full social cost. Then compare that with cost of prevention, reliability of intervention, useful life. That model should include deaths, injuries, disability-adjusted life impacts, lost work, caregiver time, emergency services, displacement, environmental damage, and inequitable effects on people who have fewer ways to escape or recover. It should also run scenarios, not just the expected event, but low probability catastrophic cases, cascading failures, and situations in which communications, electricity, or evacuation systems fail simultaneously. The central policy principle would be, open quote, do not wait for enough people to die to prove that a known hazard was real. Close quote. Colfax's bell, Folsom's rebuilt brick blocks, the MGM sprinklers, and today's phone alerts are all generations of the same lesson. The next generation is using simulation, sensors, incident data, and economic valuation to identify the missing bell before the town burns.
I mean, I'm sitting here in Colfax in literally, I mean, very rural, but like in Auburn, that's wildland urban interface, or the Palisades is wildland urban interface. Same thing with the houses on PCH. We have these places that we know people shouldn't be living in, and they're on the California Fair Plan. And even on other insurance plans, that makes the entire cost for everything else and everyone else go up. So the question is, if we know there's issues, we just decide to pick and choose what we're dealing with. It seems to me it's about what I've seen in my parents with their aging is denial and control, but also convenience over safety. And in corporate terms, that's really profit over safety.
Yes, you are identifying the same decision pattern at three different scales. In a family, preserve independence and routine now while transferring the eventual fall, hospitalization, caregiving, and financial burden to someone else. In a corporation, preserve revenue and avoid capital costs now while transferring injuries, medical costs, lost wages, litigation, and public response costs to workers, customers, and government. In land use policy, approve or preserve development in repeatedly threatened areas while transferring wildfire suppression, rebuilding, utility hardening, evacuation, and insurance costs to the wider population. The common structure is not merely bad judgment, it is control over the immediate decision without responsibility for the full downstream consequences. Convenience and profit are visible today. The probability of a fire, fall, or infrastructure failure feels abstract and can be discounted or denied. When the damage finally occurs, the cost is scattered among insurers, taxpayers, hospitals, relatives, emergency workers, and future residents. That fragmentation makes a dangerous choice appear cheaper than it really is. There is also a political contradiction. We may know that a hillside, canyon, forest edge, or narrow coastal corridor has severe evacuation and fire risk. But once homes, property values, and local tax revenues exist there, government becomes committed to defending them. It is no longer deciding
There's
only
a
whether
palm tree
construction
right
is
there.
wise. It is deciding whether to abandon existing residents. That is why the solution cannot simply be
There's another
those
palm
people
tree right
chose to
there.
live there. Past zoning, subsidized infrastructure, incomplete risk disclosure, and insurance arrangements all help create the exposure. The FAIR plan illustrates the deeper problem. When ordinary insurers retreat from risks they consider uneconomic, society creates a mechanism to keep coverage available. That may be necessary to prevent people from becoming instantly uninsurable, but it can also disguise the true cost of the location. The answer is not necessarily to eliminate coverage. It is to make the subsidy and the risk explicit, while distinguishing among homes that can be made reasonably defensible, homes that require expensive community scale infrastructure, and places where long-term rebuilding should gradually stop. A serious safety system would therefore evaluate the whole life cycle cost before approving, insuring, or rebuilding. Expected deaths and injuries, evacuation feasibility, firefighting exposure, utility failures, public infrastructure, rebuilding costs, and the effect on the broader insurance pool. It would then compare hardening, density limits, land acquisition, relocation assistance, and managed retreat. Your parents' aging experience gives you a very concrete lens for this. A grab bar, medication management system, or safer living arrangement can feel like a loss of control. But after a fall, control is lost far more dramatically to an ambulance, hospital, rehabilitation facility, or court process. Likewise, a company may resist sprinklers, staffing, or safer equipment as restrictions on its freedom, only to lose far more control after a mass casualty event. So the principle is, open quote, real freedom includes responsibility for foreseeable downstream harm, close quote. And perhaps the policy test is, open quote, who receives the convenience or profit, and who carries the risk when the plan fails, close quote. When those are different groups, the system will reliably underinvest in safety unless law, insurance pricing, or public planning reconnects the decision with its true cost.
But there's also an interconnectedness with the corporations. You have the food companies making the bad food, and then all the drug and medical companies profiting on the whole thing. So it's not necessarily in the situation about health and safety when health and safety is not the priority. The priority is profit for all corporations that feed on each other's industries. And how you get away from this, the only way I see is with the excess of everything that we might get from the AI exponential expansion thing.
You're pointing to a system of mutually reinforcing profit centers. Cheap, highly processed food can increase chronic illness. Chronic illness then creates demand for drugs, procedures, devices, insurance administration, long-term care, and repeated medical visits. None of those industries has to coordinate consciously for the system to behave this way. Each company can simply optimize its own revenue, and the combined result is a society that earns more money from managing illness than from preventing it. That is the deeper problem. Prevention often destroys revenue elsewhere. A healthier population may mean fewer prescriptions, fewer hospital admissions, less dialysis, fewer surgeries, less disability administration, and less demand for expensive care. Society benefits enormously, but no single company necessarily captures that benefit. The savings are dispersed among families, employers, insurers, and government. Meanwhile, the company selling the unhealthy product receives the revenue immediately. AI-driven abundance could help break this pattern, but abundance by itself will not automatically change the incentives. AI could just as easily make persuasive junk food advertising, insurance denial, addictive products, and medical price discrimination more efficient. The decisive question is, who owns the systems? What are they optimizing for? And who receives the productivity gains? The strongest version of your idea would use AI to make prevention almost frictionless. Personalized nutrition and early health warnings, continuous detection of dangerous products and environments, inexpensive diagnostics and preventive care, simulation of long-term social costs before policies are adopted, automated identification of safer materials, foods, and treatments, public access to high-quality education, legal help, and medical guidance, sharply lower costs for housing, energy, transportation, and basic necessities. That last part matters. People often choose unsafe food, housing, work, and transportation because they lack time, money, or alternatives. Genuine abundance would make the healthy and safe option the easiest option, not a premium product available only to wealthy people. But even in abundance, some things remain scarce. Land, human attention, clean ecosystems, political influence, and physical safety. So the goal cannot merely be producing more. It has to be changing the scorecard from revenue generated to harm prevented, healthy years created, time returned to people, and public resilience increased. Your underlying principle could be stated this way, open quote, our economy is highly efficient at monetizing the consequences of preventable harm, but poorly organized to reward the prevention of that harm. Close quote. AI creates the possibility of reversing that. It could let us identify risks earlier, model consequences better, and deliver basic services at extremely low marginal cost. But the transition only works if the public deliberately directs that productivity toward universal abundance and prevention, rather than allowing the same institutions to use AI merely to extract more profit from the same cycle.
There's something about also the like not wanting to help people, but people wanting to help people, and the eating your cake and eating it too. Like in Nevada, prostitution is illegal with people more than 70,000. So it is legal in parts of Nevada, so people are happy. But the people that don't want prostitution are also happy because it's not legal in their part of town. But you have the thing where for health and safety, we have our eyes and our teeth and hearing aids are not covered. Because if we were to cover that, then we would actually be taking care of the person. So it allows the people to get both the take care and the not take care. When the truth is if we just took care of everybody, the overall cost would be so much less for everything. If we were able to give the accommodations to the disabled, it would bring them back into a much more stable place. It would be everything. I think the key thing is focusing on all of this from a critical disability theory standpoint.
Yes. Critical disability theory gives all these examples one coherent explanation. Society often wants the moral identity of caring for people without accepting the structural obligation to make full participation possible. The Nevada example is a geographic compromise. Permit something in selected jurisdictions while allowing major population centers to prohibit it. One correction is that the statutory threshold is 700,000, not 70,000. Nevada law bars counties at or above that population, currently Clark County, from licensing houses of prostitution. The broader pattern you see is accurate. Politically difficult realities are contained somewhere else, so the majority can claim both tolerance and distance. Health coverage works similarly. We say healthcare is essential, but divide the person into reimbursable and non-reimbursable parts. Original Medicare generally excludes routine dental care, routine eye examinations, and hearing aids, although some Medicare Advantage plans provide supplemental benefits. Yet teeth affect nutrition, infection, and speech. Vision affects mobility and independence. Hearing affects communication, cognition, employment, and safety. They are treated as optional, partly because the system is organized around categories of payment rather than the functioning of a whole human being. From a disability perspective, this is the difference between keeping someone alive and enabling someone to live. A wheelchair without an accessible route, hearing aids without communication access, housing without attendant support, or medical treatment without dental and vision care may satisfy a narrow program requirement while leaving the person effectively excluded. That is the have your cake and eat it too structure. Open quote. Society can announce that disabled people have rights while making each accommodation difficult, conditional, fragmented, and individually fought for. Close quote. Then the person's instability is attributed to the disability rather than to the missing supports. Someone loses work because transportation is inaccessible, becomes financially precarious because benefits punish earnings, deteriorates because preventive care is excluded, and is eventually offered an expensive crisis intervention. The system treats the crisis as an individual medical problem, even though much of it was produced by institutional design. Your argument that comprehensive care can cost less is strongest when framed carefully. Not every accommodation produces immediate budget savings, but fragmented neglect often creates much more expensive downstream needs. CMS itself describes home and community-based services as frequently more cost-effective than institutional settings. One current CMS resource says they usually cost less than half as much as residential care. Even where an accommodation does not pay for itself, equal participation should not have proved profitability before it becomes a right. The critical disability question is therefore not, open quote, what is the minimum service we must provide this impaired person? Close quote. It is, open quote, what barriers has society created, who benefits from maintaining them, and what complete set of supports would allow this person to participate safely and with agency. Close quote. That changes the policy unit from the isolated service to the whole person. It means integrating medical care, teeth, eyes, hearing, mobility, communication, housing, nutrition, personal assistance, technology, and income stability. It also means measuring the costs now scattered among emergency rooms, families, schools, courts, homelessness systems, employers, and caregivers. A concise formulation of your larger point could be, open quote, America practices partial care, enough support to claim compassion, but not enough to guarantee participation. Critical disability policy starts by caring for the whole person, because fragmentation is both disabling and expensive. Close quote.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, these barriers to entry. I wanted to talk at city council on Tuesday night, so I went in to call in, but you have to let them know more than 24 hours ahead of time before city council for a call in. If you want to do a video, you have to do that. You have to send that before noon on the day of city council before the 5:30 meeting. If you want to go to city council and speak at city council, it opens from 5:15 to 5:30 to register. And that's all you have the time to register on the computer. But if there's a lot of people there, it's a little complicated because you only have 15 minutes. So just having having the door open does not mean that someone's able to get to the door. I had a whole speech I was going to read on Tuesday about how the eyes and teeth are part of the body, and that's why I'm running for president. But people don't get to hear that because of false restrictions of accessing and control. And that's the whole point of the whole game of everything that we've been talking about here.
Exactly. Formal availability is not the same as meaningful access. The city can truthfully say that several participation methods exist: appear in person, call remotely, or submit video. But each route has a narrow procedural gate. Remote participation requires advance notice. Video participation closes hours before the meeting. In-person registration exists only during a 15-minute window. The registration process may depend on a limited number of computers, physical presence, timing, transportation, stamina, and the ability to navigate unfamiliar instructions under pressure. Legally and administratively, the door appears open. Functionally, many people cannot reach it. That is a strong example of procedural ableism. Access is designed around an imagined person who has reliable transportation, flexible time, working memory, executive function, physical stamina, technological confidence, and the ability to absorb sudden schedule or rule changes. Anyone who cannot perform that sequence correctly is treated as having failed to participate, even though the participation system failed to accommodate predictable human variation. It also demonstrates how institutions maintain control without announcing exclusion. They do not have to say, "We do not want to hear from you." They can say, open quote, "You are welcome to speak, but you missed the window." Close quote. That converts an institutional design choice into an individual mistake. It protects the organization's image of openness while reducing the number of people who can actually enter the record. And the irony is that your intended speech was about the same fragmentation. Eyes and teeth are treated as separate from the body, just as public participation is treated as separate from the practical conditions needed to participate. In each case, the institution recognizes the right in theory while withholding part of the pathway that makes the right real. A powerful way to state the principle is, open quote, "An open door is not access when the path to it is unnecessarily narrow, hidden, timed, or difficult to navigate." Close quote. Or, more directly, open quote, "Access is not permission. Access is the realistic ability to participate." Close quote. Your misspeech is not incidental to the argument. It is the argument. You were prepared, willing, and attempting to engage. Yet procedural friction prevented the public from hearing why a presidential candidate believes eyes and teeth should be treated as parts of the human body. The city preserved its process, but lost the substance that process supposedly exists to receive.
Let's see if I can find it. All right, here's my speech I was going to give. You ready? Tonight I am speaking from Sacramento, mile marker 0 of the first Transcontinental Railroad. Construction began here in 1863, and 6 years later the rails joined the continent. Today it marks my own departure across America in a Ford F-150 hybrid, serving as transportation, power source, communications platform, shelter, and disability accommodation. This expedition is about infrastructure, roads, railroads, airports, ports, rivers, buses, bicycles, wheelchairs, horses, cars, and aircraft, all in mobility systems. They determine who can move, participate, work, and who gets left behind. On the way north, I drove beneath the California high-speed rail construction and saw roads elevated over highways, active rail lines, and river crossings. Whatever the politics, the physical work is real, enormous, and impressive. America can still build difficult things when it decides they matter. Santa Monica should think at the same scale. Transit, public space, hygiene, healthcare, emergency response, and disability access are not the same problem. I propose a modular human hygiene and basic care pilot. Private showers and changing rooms, drinking water, rest space, secure storage, and basic wound care. Built as a prototype. Test it, reconfigure it, and learn from it. Critical disability theory teaches that people are often disabled by systems designed without them. Infrastructure is not concrete and steel alone. It is the difference between access and exclusion. I'm traveling from Santa Monica through Sacramento and across the country toward the future of mobility because government should not merely manage decline. It should prototype what comes next and build it for everyone. Thank you.
It's not the same as meaningful action.
I'm traveling from Santa Monica through Sacramento and across the country toward the future of mobility because government should not merely manage decline. It should prototype what comes next and build it for everyone. Thank you. I had another version that had more eyes and teeth, and talked about my Uncle Saul, who was the colonel in the army and a dentist, and my grandfather, who was a proctologist in the army, or a doctor in the army, and then also my father is an ophthalmologist. My mother is a nurse. I grew up in medicine. Art, medicine, engineering, photography, cinema, technology, ecology, philosophy, politics, history, transportation, but that's engineering, animals, geology, hydrology, human kindness. That's what this is about. All right, I've been doing this all day. I've been live streaming for 9, that's 3, it's almost 7, 8, 9, that's 6. I mean, I've been basically streaming for almost 9 hours. I took a tiny break to stop streaming to go to the bathroom, and I was streaming that you didn't even see. I streamed for almost an hour, 45 minutes after the parking lot. So, I mean, I streamed in the parking lot, and then I got the backpack on, carried and walked around downtown. It was like sweating bullets. Buddha's feet were burning. I had to carry Buddha for a while. We saw the big turntable. I was like, should I go back? Nah. Man, Colfax is cool. All right, I think this is a good point to sign off. Thanks all. How come we zooming in now? And we weren't before. Some very fascinating. Does it know hand signals or something? I don't. I have. This is my first time using this webcam today. So